I think life in the Peloton's about 7 years this year, maybe. And then in that time, I want to say it's about 2016. The podcast world wasn't what it is today, which is great because podcasting, you can get what you want. You can find anything out, pretty much listen to a podcast. It's almost like a Google now. You're just like, I want to hear it. I want to learn about something. I'll just find a podcast. And in those days, like whatever it was, 2016, Joe Rogan was still really big. Tim Ferriss was one that I was listening to. And I just sort of, it was a really foreign idea that you could just listen to someone. I was sort of like, so what do? You just put it on and listen? It's sort of a bit weird. I don't know. It doesn't sound that weird now, but then it was. So I used to go out riding because I was training as a pro, and I'll be in the off season doing a lot of Ks on my own. I put this podcast in. I was like, this is actually awesome because it feels like I've got someone riding next to me, but I don't really have to answer them. I'm just listening in on a conversation. I'm like, this is such a brilliant idea. And during that time, or every year I was coming back to Australia, I was continually getting asked the same questions, even though I'd probably been a pro for about 10 years at that point. It was like, oh, but so what is pro cycling? Like, what do you actually do over there? Do you all live in one house? Do you actually get sponsored? Do you get paid? How does it all work? And I'm thinking, how can people seriously still not know this? And then it sort of clicked with me. I'm like, well, how could they know this? Because you can only sort of read the articles on, whatever it was, cycling tips or cycling news, but it doesn't go into that little kind of small details. I thought, well, maybe I could just try this podcasting thing. Maybe I could just create this, life in the Peloton where I'm just simply explaining what our life is like. It'd be super easy for me to do. I don't have to do any research. All I have to do is just ask the questions that everyone asked me, and it more or less took shape from there.
What do you feel like you've learned about cycling from being a podcaster, making podcasts about cycling that you didn't know before you started?
In the early days, and actually even right until now, I always learn something from the podcast because I think that's what drives me. Is my guests in the beginning were all either teammates or guys that I raced against that I knew. And the reason why I interviewed them, it wasn't necessarily because they were the biggest names in the world and everyone wanted to hear from them. It was just something because I found them interesting and I wanted to actually pick their brain about how they did something as a professional. So I was continually trying to learn off them, even though they didn't know it. And weirdly, when I pulled the mic out, it didn't feel as weird to ask them those questions. Whereas if we'd just been sitting together alone, I'd be like, asking them those questions would have been a bit weird. Like, oh, mate, how do you do this? How do you overcome pressure as a winner? How do you, manage that expectation? They would have been like, what is this? Is this an interview? Suddenly you pull the mic out and they're happy to talk about that. And actually, I was just mentally taking notes. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, cool. I might try that myself. So that was my sort of tactic to, I guess, motivate me to do the podcasting. Early on, I didn't even track numbers, probably for the first 3 or 4 years. It wasn't as easy to find numbers out. There wasn't one hub that drew all your numbers in, and it wasn't like that. So I just didn't really care, and I wasn't really aware of it. I didn't have sponsors. So I was really doing it only for my own research in a way, and for the personal feedback I got from people that I might see along the way and just say, hey, I love listening to your podcast. That was enough for me. I'd be like, cool, someone likes it. I like doing it. So it just sort of, I kept learning from it.
Have there been moments when you've deliberately changed your approach or the direction of what you're doing with the podcast, or has it all evolved organically for you?
There's definitely a deliberate approach when I retired as a pro. The idea of life in the Peloton. Okay, well, how can I still call it that if I'm not in the Peloton? And it only was then that I sort of started thinking about the word Peloton. It's like, why does that only refer to a World Tour Peloton? Well, it doesn't really. There's many Pelotons outside of that. There's also amateur racing. There's also bunch rides. There's also gravel Pelotons, mountain bike Pelotons. And I was like, actually, this is a great chance for me to explore the rest of the world, the Pelotons out there. So that was a real deliberate sort of change there, but actually it was very similar. I was no longer explaining all the intricate details of being a pro, but I was explaining all the other details of this world that's exploding now. I think in the in the community cycling, in the, participation cycling, where people still want to know all those little bits, tidbits. And actually, I think one thing has been nice is people can relate a lot more to what I'm talking about now, opposed to the World Tour stuff was very interesting, but it was difficult to relate to that. It's like, well, I sort of don't know what that's really like. Well, now it's like, I was actually at that event. I know exactly what they were talking about, Look, early on, there were times where towards the end of my career, especially as a professional cyclist, I was struggling to relate to the younger riders. And even though I was interviewing them, I was just sort of ticking the box. And I realized, why am I not liking these interviews anymore? I realized because I'm not learning anything from them that I'm interested in. So again, I had to go back to the reason why I started. I need to find people or areas or topics that I'm interested to learn about. And that's what sort of drove the interview.
Yeah, just to take your recent interview with Cadell, for example, I've been a big fan of Cadell. I followed his career very closely. And I feel like you always get to the things that when I was a working journalist for a decade was always trying to get to, which is like pulling something out of there with someone who's very overexposed that you might not know about them or about their experience. And what is your approach as an interviewer to get to those moments? Do you have like a specific strategy or like approach that you take to try to get to those, or does it just kind of happen organically?
Look, I think early on it did happen organically because I was choosing people that I was friends with. And, those stories, those bits of information were just stuff that we talked about or experienced together. So, of course, no one knew about them. And people weren't overexposed to interviews or podcasts at that stage. But as the podcast evolved, now before I speak to someone, I can actually often find another podcast on them, which is handy to do research. It's an easy way to do research. I'm like, sweet, I'll just listen to a couple of podcasts and find out about this person. But on the same note, they've also told their story a million times. So that does drive me, exactly what you say. I do want to find a different angle and find something that they're telling again for the first time, it almost feels like. That they feel a bit more inspired. They're not just rehashing the old story. Of course, look, a guy like Cadell Evans, I could not talk about the Tour de France or the World Championships. And I know he's told those stories a million times. I still want to hear them because they're going to be slightly different again. But for me, the most interesting stuff is when he's telling that stuff where he goes, wow, yeah, I hadn't thought about that, or I hadn't told that story for such a long time. And a lot of that comes back to me doing phone calls and interviews with other people that know him. And that's where, so for instance, like I said, if I know them personally, those stories are organically there. But I then reach out to people who know, say, Cadell Evans personally, and they tell me those organic stories that only him and them know about growing up racing together. So then I can take a little bit of their story and bring that topic up. For me, that's the best way for me to remember stuff. Reading and writing is a way for me to sort of research someone, but I find if I have those notes, I really do refer to those notes very structurally, and it can wreck my interview in a way because I'm like, I've got all this great research. I better refer to it. I've spent all this time and, ask these, line by line questions, and I'm not really listening to the answer from the guest. Opposed to if I've spoken to someone about this person, that knowledge goes in and it's there somewhere. And I'm talking to, Cadell. I'm like, oh, that's right. And we just keep following sort of a rabbit hole and just keep going with it. And that's my interview style. It's not, very, well, I'm not professional. It's not the right word, but it's not very structured, but it's the way that I like to do it and, sort of follow hooks and, keep following that way.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a bit like preparing for competition, doing training, and then once you get in the midst of competition, you go where the race takes you potentially.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really good way, a really good analogy. It's otherwise you've sort of gone, look, I think this race is going to have these amount of efforts in it. They're the only efforts I'm going to do. But what happens if the race goes that way? Then you're like, well, I'm not ready for that. And sometimes I have been a little bit stuck like that with guests. I've got these questions. I thought they were going to be good. They answer them very quickly, and suddenly I'm out of questions. I'm like, oh, I'm swimming now. I've got nothing else to ask them. So I've had to learn the hard way as well.
Yeah, the interview with Cadell, I don't know if this was a new one for you, but something that really jumped out at me when he was talking about his childhood and specifically, man, just at such a young age, he was incredibly dedicated to like, I'm going to be a professional cyclist. This is what I'm doing. And then he talked about getting up at 5 a.m. to go out, train, being freezing cold, riding his bike to school, and then being soaking wet in his clothing and then falling asleep in the afternoon. I don't know if you knew that story, but I mean, that just floored me. It was just a very powerful anecdote.
I didn't know that specific story, but I'd heard about, I just heard about how dedicated he was. And one thing I really wanted to sort of set up in that interview, and I do mention it in that interview, is that the reason why I set that up is I feel like the way the Peloton has been happening, especially at the end of my career and what I've seen now, is that, for good or for bad, that there is an easy way, especially for Australians, to get across to Europe. They can just make that flight. They can set themselves up in a place like Girona and they can just sort of live the life as a pro without, I feel like, almost doing their apprenticeship, their hardship. And just, I want to set up, like, how do the champions become champions? Well, it starts right here. This guy, there was no shortcut for Cadel Evans. And I know it's stereotypical sort of stuff that everyone hears. There's no shortcuts in that, but they need to hear how ridiculous the dedication is to become a Tour de France champion. And that's what I loved about that story. And other little tidbits he put in there was like, this guy was, and I mean this in all positive, he was a freak about it. He was like, I don't care what anyone says. And even when he was pro, you look back, everyone had this sort of harsh opinion about Cadel Evans. He's strange. What's going on with Cadel? It was because he didn't want to fold into what the Peloton wanted him to do. And all of a sudden, we're seeing everyone being a Cadel Evans now. And it's seen really, it's accepted now. I love that he just was so mentally strong that he just went, I don't care. I know what I'm doing is right. And the weight of the team and the weight of the tradition of cycling didn't change his way. I sort of love that.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And it is interesting. Obviously, you have had a front row seat with the world's highest performers in the sport of professional cycling. And I would bet that you've been around a lot of other top performers in professional sport. And it is always interesting when people who are not in that context are observing what's happening and have opinions about the personalities of professional athletes who are doing exceptional things and are such outliers in terms of their ability to physically and mentally perform, and then expect them to be like everyone else. Like, by their nature, they're very different people than everyone else, or they would not be able to do what they're doing, right?
Totally, yeah. And that's the funny thing is you come into, it happens with everyone. I'm talking about cycling now. You come into a professional team and the professional team's got their certain way of running things because they know that, for whatever, many years they've been doing it. It worked for 90% of the guys. You're expected to fold into that and work that way. I'm sure it happens in all other sports as well, but you've become to that level of professional. You've become a professional by doing it your own way, the way that worked for you. And you're supposed to almost like disregard that and almost learn a new skill. It's very hard. And that's why I think we see that sort of failure rate in the first few years, because it's just such a shock. You come in, you're supposed to learn this new way, these new sort of different traditions and, training ways and the way, and then you've got the racing on top of that and blah, blah, blah. And it's very difficult. And I think it's also very difficult to, as a young pro, as a neo pro, to stand up and be strong enough to say, no, I'm confident that that's the way that I want to do it. And I'll show you, because, 2 years goes very quick without turning it around and saying, hey, look, I told you this is the way it is.
So Mitch, you're on the other side of your world tour career. I do want to ask you a few things about the world tour. And in particular, one of the things that's really on my mind right now that I'm sure is on the minds of a lot of people with Unchained being out, one of the scenes that really struck me was on the Alpe d'Huez stage. After Pidcock wins the stage, they show him going with his rolly bag back to his hotel room, and he's just kind of sitting there just alone. And it just struck me how alone and perhaps how lonely that lifestyle might be at times, even though you're with the team. I was just wondering, what was your experience of that? Like, did it feel lonely in moments, or did you always feel kind of the warmth of the team around you?
I think it could very depend on the team that you're with, and not necessarily the whole outfit, but also that little squad within a race. And creating it was something that I really try to take on my own and try and create a really nice environment for the team, but also for myself to be in. I was like, okay, well, these guys are sort of switching off. They're all disappearing to their rooms. And I was like, well, I could just be also like, oh, who cares about them and worry about myself. But actually worrying about them was also reflecting on me. Because if I created a good environment, that also was a nice environment for me to hang around in. So definitely it can be very lonely if you disregard that. Everyone does switch off and just worry about themselves, because it is an individual sport in a way. You've got to prepare for yourself. You've been preparing on your own to get there. At the end of the day, you're the one worrying about your own contract. So when times are tough, you sort of switch off and think, oh, I've got to worry about myself. Who cares about these guys? Um, but I one of the sort of tactics or tricks I was able to sort of employ during the grand tours was just trying to create a fun environment. Whether I was playing some cards, whether I was putting some different playlists on the bus, just trying to involve everyone and break them out of their own little bubble, which ultimately made those tough times during a grand tour, all those victories, that much better, because everyone was just a little bit more together. Of course, when we race, we're a team and we're doing our job and everything like that. But I think afterwards was as important as on the bike. After dinner, playing some cards for another hour, or in the bus, keeping everyone in the conversation without having their headphones on and looking on their phones the whole time. So I do agree with you that at the end of a stage like that, everyone's sort of just pissed off to their room and just gone, I got to worry about tomorrow. That was great, you won, but let's just move on.
And as you think about your time in the world tour now and the expectations you might have had for what life would be like afterwards, is what you're doing now, does it kind of match the vision you had, or were you in search of a direction when you left?
I didn't think it'd be this busy, that's for sure. I did think my life was busy as a pro, but I realized that you do have a lot of time to sort of relax and recover. Um, yeah, like it was difficult to envision what it would really be like. Being back in Australia for me is better than I thought it would be. I already wanted to come back and was really longing to be back in my own culture. But it's just great. I love being back, and I love, our sports of cricket, and we've got the rugby league on at the moment. So I love getting back into that. Cycling's still a big part of my life, but I'm live in a small town now, so getting involved with the community, my kids are playing football. So that side of things has been really refreshing. Um, I've enjoyed that, breaking out of the world tour bubble. Everything it was so consuming as a pro. When I went training with my mates, we'd be talking or bitching about the team. And when you went to, for dinner or having, a party or whatever, the same group of friends, great guys, but all you could really talk about was cycling. That's all you knew. That's all you were talking about. That's all you were doing. So it's been very refreshing to break out of that bubble. I've still got that there with life in the Peloton and the things I do on the bike. But, when I come home on a weekend, I don't, half the people in this town don't even really follow cycling at all. Or wouldn't say even half, 95% of the people don't follow cycling. So it's very easy to slip through the cracks. But in terms of the business side of things, I had an idea that I wanted to, especially in the last year when I decided to retire. I think that was a really nice thing, making that call very early, which I did in sort of, I think around April, gave me that 6 months or more to sort of go, okay, let's think about next year. Let's think about what maybe we can do. And in the beginning, I think, yeah, it was an element of what I thought, coming back and doing some different events. I knew I wasn't done riding a bike. I just knew I was sort of done with the whole world tour scene. So it's been great to be able to still include riding in my life. work as a job in a way, because it's, like I said before, so busy. It's difficult to justify, I'm going to go out on the bike for a few hours now. Whereas now, if it's still my job, you know what, I still need to get out on the bike. But things have evolved. Things have really evolved, as everything does. And I'm loving where life in the Peloton and where my life is sort of evolving to now. It's a really nice mix of everything. A bit of media, a bit of physical cycling, but it's not all encompassed around that one thing. It's just so different every day.
And you do still continually take on new challenges. You're doing things like the Cape Epic. I know you're doing a lot of bike packing. What draws you to new and different challenges? And is there anything that you've got up your sleeve that you want to give a shot?
I think that definitely the bikepacking adventures is sort of about, one is for sure, it's about exploration for me. Sorry, I couldn't get that word out. I love to sort of adventure and gives me that time to sort of reset and think about what I'm doing in my life. But there's a big element about trying to inspire other people to get out and do stuff like this. I think sometimes it can just seem too big, too hard. You've got to do an adventure that was like Lockie Morton, go all night long, no sleeping. It's like, no, you can do it. And I think he likes doing it this way too. You can do it in hotels and pubs, and you can have a bit of fun, and you can do 50, 100K a day. You don't have to do 300K a day. So I think that's fun, exploring that. And as I get further away from the world tour, I get closer to it, doing those kinds of adventures, because my legs aren't the same, and I don't need to put myself into a hole every time I do an adventure. So when it comes to an event like Cape Epic, definitely mountain biking for me at the moment has been so refreshing, because it is still riding, but I have no expectation. I feel like with anything on the road, I'm like, wow, I know what I could do before, so I should be doing that. There's still this expectation in my own mind. Or maybe I think that people think I should do something. Whereas it comes to mountain biking, I'm like, well, I'm just like a complete nuffy in this. Who cares? Like, if I can get down this thing, or if I can try and get up this, great. So Cape Epic was one of those things where it was the top of the tree. I was very surprised they wanted me over there. Doing it with a guy like Ian was the best too, because he was also just sort of finding his feet in mountain biking. We're both having a laugh, yet the connection there for me was better than I thought it would be with Ian, because we had this unspoken knowledge from racing all those years. It was so fun to be back with a guy from the World Tour. That was something that I didn't realize I'd missed. Racing with the guys in the World Tour, that level, at the highest level, that, like I said, that unspoken knowledge of how to race. Like when I was suffering, he knew just to drop the pace back a slight bit. When it was crosswinds, I naturally just sat out just a wheel length for him to get underneath me, And we did all this stuff, which was cool, that we did every day as a pro. But I hadn't realized I'd missed that stuff until I did it again. I'm like, this is so cool. Like, I just got like a teammate. We don't even need to speak. We organized this. We orchestrated this attack in Cape Epic where we didn't even speak. And I went up the road and Ian came across to me and we just like soloed away. I was just like, got to the end, we're laughing about it. It's like, how cool was that? We just didn't even need to speak about it. When you went, I just knew exactly what you were doing. So those adventures are really fun. I think it's a combination at the moment for me to do 1 or 2 events a year where I really push myself physically, try and push the boat out, see how good I am, try and race, because I still have that competitive side of me. But then I would say 90% of the year, I'm just more, I'm much more content with just being in the community, riding, taking it off a notch, because I have burnt those matches. And I did get to the end of Cape Epic, and Ian and I looked across at each other and went, you know what? I think we've ticked that box for this year. It's enough racing. So you do know it very quickly. You get right back to the World Tour very, very quickly. All it takes is 1 or 2 races, and you're like, that's enough for this year. Yeah.
What was the toughest moment you had as a pro in the World Tour? When did you suffer, when you look back, when did you suffer the very most in your entire career?
Physically?
Yeah. Or mentally, whatever. Choose your own adventure.
I had one real bad moment. It just comes to mind. Maybe there was more, but one that comes to mind is in the Vuelta. Might have been, I can't remember what year it was. Maybe 2015. I didn't finish it, and yeah, I sort of had this. It was a stage in Andorra, and I was really nervous about this stage, and it was a really short stage, a lot of climbing altitude meters, and I got dropped, and we got through, and I was in the last group, and we made it. And in my mind, I was like, we made it. Like, that's it. Like, the Vuelta's like done. Like, I've done the hardest, most biggest stage. It was like stage 13 or something. So it was in the middle of the race, but I was like, that was the biggest thing that I was so scared about in this Vuelta, and I made it. I can't believe it. But it was actually the next day. We went down and we hit this big climb, and it was a sprint stage, and I was really off. I couldn't do anything in the sprint stage, and I got through it. And I thought, oh, okay, that's just because of Andorra the day before. You know, I'm so tired, but I got through it. And it was actually the next day. We had an uphill start, and I just got dropped straight from the gun, and I never got back. And it sort of caught me off guard. You know, I broke down. I remember I was riding along on my own. I knew it was, well, I thought it was over. I sort of broke down on the bike, you know, emotionally. And I wanted the director sportif to tell me to jump off the bike. It was a guy called Julian Dean. I was like yelling out to the car, what do you think? It's over. You know, like, I'm out. I can't keep up. I'm never going to, you know, just emotion. He's like, that's all right, mate. Like, he probably knew it was over, but he ultimately wanted me to make the decision. Mate, you keep going. You just keep riding. And if you've had enough, then you stop. But just keep going, mate. Just you'll get back. And all I wanted him to do was tell me, "No, you get off. It's over." Because I knew then. Well, I didn't know at the time, but thinking about it now, I knew then if someone else told me to stop, I'd always have. You know what? I probably could have got back, but the DS told me to jump off, so I did. You know, but ultimately he said, "No, you choose your own adventure. You stop if you think it's enough." So ultimately I did. And I had to overcome that myself. I was going on to the World Championships in Richmond. It must have been 2015 after that, a few weeks after. And it was a massive cloud of doubt over my head. I can't even finish the Vuelta. So how am I going to be good? You know, ultimately a completely different race, a one-day race. How am I going to be good at the World Championships? And that was a whole process the next 2 weeks I had to sort of overcome. And coming out the other side, had a great World Championships. I did my job, and I was just like, it was a real learning curve in the middle of my career to understand the psychological side of it, but also understand my physical side of it too.
What did you carry forward from that experience?
I think understanding on a Grand Tour side of things, understanding not to take, and it sounds very, you know, obvious, but to take every day as it is. You know, for me, like I said there, it was the mountain. I was over the mountain. I almost let go. Oh, I've made it, you know, but there was some tough stuff coming. It didn't necessarily look tough on paper. It was just sort of a 5K uphill start. But if you're on your hands and knees and mentally you weren't psyched up for that, of course, that can catch you out. And just sort of employing different, you know, I think I started working with a psychologist from that moment on. Not necessarily because of that point, but there'd been a few other points where I'd reached the limit and emotionally I was having sort of outbreaks. And in my position in the team, I was moving into a bit more of a leadership position. I thought, well, that's sort of, I can't be like that. I need to understand what's going on in these moments when I'm down, you know, like, I mean, strip raw physically. And the only thing I've got left is just sort of emotionally sort of let anything out. And I just sort of had to track that a little bit. And I needed some help around that. And I needed to understand what was going on in my own mind, also for my physical ability to allow me to be a better rider, but also to be a better leader. So I think they were really some really nice points that went on from that moment. Not necessarily from that exact moment, but just building from there.
Did you have the self-awareness to realize the things you just shared with me, or did someone around you say, "Hey, Mitch, here's something you might want to think about," and kind of point you in the direction of a sports psychologist or having some assistance with refining your thinking?
No one ever really said, you know, you need a sports psychologist, or maybe that would be awesome if teams were doing that kind of stuff. And I think that's a massive loophole in pro cycling, is that we don't have a lot more psychological support, not necessarily just for people who are crazies, but people who just are trying to find themselves again. But it was just a few comments, from, I remember the team doctor came to me and he said, I'm generally a lot of energy and a smiling sort of guy, and bring the energy to the group. And I was just walking down the hallway to the lift, and he's like, "Morning, Mitch." And I was like, "Morning, Peter." He's like, "Hey, what's up?" I'm like, "Oh, nothing's up. I'm just tired, And he said, "Okay." And I'm walking off. He goes, "Wait, Mitch, mate, just remember, like, there's a lot of people looking towards you, and this is you. I know you're tired, but you bring the energy to the group." And I realized at that point, sort of the impact that I did have when I came in really low. A guy, maybe if you're just sort of monotone the whole time, people don't really notice it. But if you bring the energy and you're sort of asking the questions and having a laugh the whole time, and suddenly you come in, you're super low, people draw off that as well. So I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting." And then, then I think the team said to me at one point, "Hey, you get really emotional in these grand tours." So it was another point. And then I'm just remembering an actual moment in a race where I lost my mind about getting the wrong bottle on a climb. When I was just trying to hang there, I was just maybe going to make this climb, maybe not. Asked for a water, got a bottle full of mix, and I lost it. Where's the water, And it was later in the day, I'm rolling in, thinking about that situation. I'm like, "Oh, it wasn't really that good then, So there's all these little things that made me think, okay, I need to understand what's going on in my mind for exactly what I said, for the leadership role, but also for myself to make myself a stronger rider, a better full package." And so I just sort of started reaching out to some people that I knew who were psychologists.
What specifically did you do to transform that? Did you start talking to yourself differently when those moments would pop up for you? And did you just have greater self-awareness of what was happening?
I think the first part was just understanding what was going on. And then I started working with another guy later in my career who we sort of devised this little plan, this idea of, we called it the Mitch bark, where, I would sort of bark like a dog when I had this moment. And in the beginning, it wasn't about suppressing it. It wasn't like, "Oh, just, if anything's going to happen, just push it down, push it down." It was about understanding when it did happen and then acknowledging it. Okay, wow, that just happened. Cool, acknowledge that. Rather than just sort of going on and barking all day and then getting to the end of the day and going, "Whoa, that was a really bad day." Acknowledge it when it happens. And then as it's going on, if you're acknowledging it, slowly going to be able to pick up when it's about to happen. And then, understand why that's happening. So what ended up happening was, it's not exactly like a switch where you switch it on and off and I'm cured now. It was just about understanding that when those moments were sort of appearing, oh, wow, this would normally send me down there. Okay. And sort of catching it before it would, and just sort of changing my tact. It sounds very simple. We use the bottle example, like, wow, right, that's all right, I didn't want that, and then just sort of move on and just try and change the tack. So I think it was just about being aware of it and just slowly getting closer to the root of the problem when it was going to sort of bubble up and come again.
And when you went into the world tour, what did you believe was possible for you? What did you feel your highest level of achievement might be? And when did you determine this is the kind of rider I am and this is what I'm best at?
Look, I rode 3 years in a pro continental team before I went to World Tour. And I think that was an amazing way to come into the World Tour, because I'd sort of been exposed to the highest level, but not day in, day out. So we would do, a handful of World Tour races a year where you get your head kicked in, but you would train up for them. You'd use the smaller races to be in the peak form and tackle those races, and then you'd come away from them. You didn't have to hit another classic the day after or another Paris-Nice next week or whatever. You just did it, So that was sort of allowed me to understand the expectation when I went to World Tour. By the time I was at the World Tour, I'd sort of moved into the position as a lead out man. And because I think, without realizing it or not, I'd understood that in order to be in the peloton, you need to specialize in a position very, very well. Whether you're a winner, whether you're a guy who's winning stages, whether you're a super domestique on clients, whether you're a lead out man, you need to be the best at that job. And so I was understood that, rather than sort of being a jack of all trades and this idea of, I want to still win, the Tour de France. I think I'd pretty much come to terms with, okay, this is my niche here. I'm actually very, very good at this. And I want to strive to be the best at this job. And that was sort of enough for me. I was very happy of trying to reach that goal of being the best lead out man in the world. I had the guys I looked up to, Mark Renshaw, Brett Lancaster. These guys were doing amazing things. And when you're in your own field, you see that and you're like, God damn it, I can be better at this. So the idea of me, of course, you still want to win a race, but it wasn't the be all and end all for me. I wasn't sitting there doing these lead outs and going, when's my chance going to come to win a race? Because I was thrown a bone every so often. The sprinter, for instance, got a punch, a 5K to go, or, they weren't up for it. And me being the last man, they throw you straight in. Mitch, you're up, you're sprinting today. And I get a chance to feel what it was like doing the last 200 meters every so often. And I knew then and there, cool, I'm not that guy. I get that. Like when these guys sprint, I sort of stay at the same pace, the lead out pace. And they would just punch away from me. And I'm like, yeah, cool. I finished like 8th, 6th. Nice. But there's something special that makes those guys winners. I didn't have that. I had to win a different way, through breakaways, through, and then I'd be fast enough. A really hard day, and maybe I'd be fast enough then. But that whole role as a leader, it evolved for me. I was a lead out man, then I sort of moved into a bit of a road captain, if you will, jack of all trades, doing, looking after GC men. I love that. I frothed on that. I was trying to be the best, and you knew the guys in your fields in other teams, whether it'd be a Luke Rowe in Sky, or whether there'd be a Michael Morkov in Katusha at that time, or Quickstep. I was sort of butting heads with them in the role, but respecting what they were doing, because I knew that they were the best at doing that, and I was trying to be the best too.
What makes someone the best at that role? What are the characteristics, do you think?
A lead out man?
Yeah. Like I think particularly mentally, I think is what I'm wondering about, because to me, like that level of risk tolerance, management, and split second decision making from the outside seems like there must be a very specific psychological profile or mindset you have to carry into doing that.
There's a great episode coming up on that next week on Life in the Peloton.
I can't wait to hear it. Yeah.
I'm uncovering 5 of the best lead out men in the world. Mark Renshaw, Michael Morkov, Roger Klug. We even got fast Freddie Rodriguez back on.
Oh, nice.
Because I was really interested exactly on that question. What makes a lead out man? And this underrated job, I think, because everyone has a different sort of way of doing it. And when you hear from all these guys, they are all slightly different. Look, I think for me, the biggest thing for a lead out man was understanding your sprinter and the psychology around that. I'm not going to say you're a psychologist, but for me anyway, I used the things that made me perform. I would use the same things I would want to hear from someone. I would try and say that to my sprinter, make them feel good about themselves, give them confidence. That's what I would want to hear. I'm thinking to myself, what would I want to hear right now? What would make me feel good coming into this sprint? Oh yeah, that'd probably be good. So I'd try it out, and sure enough, it would make the sprinter feel good. So that psychologically, it was about understanding the mentality of your sprinter and what they needed. For yourself going into those sprints, it was having confidence around, I think confidence around your own ability, in that, for me, believing I was one of the best at doing that job at that time in the world. So I was like, this is where I am. This is where I deserve to be. I'm bringing one of the best sprinters in the world. I've got Caleb Ewan on my wheel. I've got, Matt Goss on my wheel. These guys are going to win today. So that's why we're here. I believe we should be here. That was the real confidence thing. And yeah, I think that was sort of it, and just not even seeing the danger if that was a thing. Once I saw the danger, it wasn't a job for me anymore. And second guessing it and fighting yourself going into a corner, fighting the wheels, thinking, oh, this is where I need to be and I have to be here, but I don't want to be here. When that changed, was time to move away from the job. And whether I knew that or not, you either got moved on from the job or you sort of went, I just can't do it. So before that, you just sort of relish in it and you love it. You're like, this is just where I want to be. In that final K, you get the rush.
What would it be like when you would come back home to Australia and, I don't know, go out on a group ride or jump into a local race? What did that feel like to you? Did it feel like 20% of the complexity compared to being in a world tour race, or maybe even less? Like, what was it like?
Yeah, we can move around the bunch super easy. And it's funny now doing mountain bike races. They're like, oh, I hated that bit in the bunch, even Cape Epic. There's a big bunch of mountain bikers and they're all just, I'm like, this is the best part of the whole day. Like Ian and I would just be picking our nose, rolling up to the front, through the middle. And you take that stuff for granted because you're used to like boxing on. And actually the sprint stuff is hectic, but there is an element of a way that it works, if that makes sense. You can't just move around because of the speed. You've got to go through the wheels or you're making a move on the outside. It's very one thing or the other. The hardest part in a bunch is, which we see a hell of a lot more now, is when the bunch is side to side and you've got your teams all lined up on the road and it's the whole bunch is covering the road right to the back. It's almost like a square of riders. It hasn't tailed off. And you're not doing 70k an hour. You're still doing somewhere between 45 and 50 or 60. So it's fast. But everyone can move. Everyone's trying to box on. And you're on the brakes because at any moment, someone in front of you has put the brakes on slightly. That is endless as well. You're doing that for hours on end in a day. So your skills get just honed every day. You're on the brakes, you're off the brakes, you're moving forward, you're sprinting in, out, and you're holding your position and trying to be smooth because you've got to go on your wheel and you're trying to eat, trying to drink, move up the side. Not only physically you're training your hands and your legs and that, but mentally you're sharpening it so unbelievably. I didn't realize that until I came back in a bunch. There's so much you see in your peripheral vision while you're doing something else, just having a chat to a mate or whatever. Someone flicks a wheel or whatever, you're just braking, moving out without even noticing. It just happens because you've been in those situations for hours on end.
When you think about what you picked up in the world tour from just sharpening the sword with that particular skill, and now, I can hear your kids in the background, which is awesome. It sounds like they're having some fun. How do you think about taking those skills and transposing them into a different context, like parenting, for example, which can definitely have its challenging moments, as much fun as it can be? Is there anything you picked up that you're carrying over?
Into parenting, I don't know about that. I think that's just a whole new game. Maybe the stamina. You can maybe hang in after a sleepless night a bit longer. I think starting my own business, Life in the Peloton is sort of evolving into a business now and working. I think I've just naturally applied that work ethic from being in the world tour, that competitiveness to be the best, to stay in the, I catch myself doing so much stuff. Maybe I don't need to do that much, but my expectation of what I can do in a day or what I want to achieve in a day, I think you just push it so far. So I think that's what I've really taken out of it, is that work ethic, and it's just sort of ingrained in you, and I'm sure that'll die away eventually. But at the moment, you just like, I'm going to do this in the morning. I'm going to go get up. If I can't do a ride, I'm going to do it in pitch black, get back. I've got a meeting to do here. We're going to take the kids there. And you just like, the day is just like jam packed because you're just like, I can do it. I can do more. Yep. You just keep saying yes. maybe that's just me too. I'm not too sure. But I think definitely that work ethic has been drilled into me. That I want to achieve so much and keep pushing forward to be not the best, but to achieve what I want with the business.
And when you're an elite professional athlete, you have a team of people around you that are helping you to achieve the highest level of performance. And that's their job, is to be there, to be that support staff, the experts who are enabling you. Now that you're in civilian life, have you surrounded yourself with a different group of experts so that you can continue to have structure and support, or are you kind of forging ahead on your own?
It has been hard, yeah. Look, that's a good question. It's been hard because we're really in that developmental stage at the moment with the life of the Peloton. Is that it is hard. Well, for me, I'm finding it hard to find those right people for the business. Thought that might have been easier than it was. I think we're very lucky in professional sport that everyone is attracted to it. Sort of the cream comes at the top, and only they're chosen to work with you. And that is something actually as a professional athlete, you do have the luxury of. You walk into a hospital and they're, oh, let's get him in, straight away. Let's, this guy's a professional athlete. We treat him right now. And, you just sort of expect that. And you come back to the real world. It's like, yeah, mate, just go back to this emergency. It's like, we've got other people that need help, So that's something that you have a luxury of as an athlete. So understanding the right people for the business has taken time, but I think that process has allowed me to understand what I need. For instance, if someone had just jumped in straight away and just sort of taken over everything, I'd be like, yeah, cool, the show rolls on. But because it hasn't happened that easy, I've actually had to think about what I need and who is the right person and find them and really hone it. So look, it's easy to say now because it's coming together, but in the moment, it was a long process to really find, right, who are the right people that are going to help me make this happen.
And so who are the people that you've been looking for, and how have you built out your business? Who do you have supporting you?
Look, we got around the podcast, got a really great guy who helps me sort of put the actual episodes together. And then, look, I had a business partner who was helping me along the way early days, and she moved on, which is what I said. I didn't realize how much she was doing, and I had a very nice luxury. I could just focus on the creativity of the direction of the podcast, the business. Once she moved on, it was like, wow, this is back on me to do all the sort of the behind the scenes stuff. So it's been great to learn that stuff again, to understand how the business ticks on, whether it's website, whether that's, the shop, whether that's organizing events, things like that. But I've got a really great guy working on brand, and another great girl working behind doing some great copywriting stuff. Now we've got some stories going. And we're building a community now with Life on the Peloton. So I've got a great guy sort of helping me set up a membership-based model. So that's the crew of Life on the Peloton at the moment, and it's managing them and their talents, understanding what they're most passionate about doing, opposed to just getting them to do jobs that they can do. Because I can also run Life on the Peloton, I guess, but I'm not passionate about doing half of those jobs. I can just get them done. It takes me twice as long and probably not as good, but I'll eventually get there. What I'm passionate about is the creativity, is about finding those guests, is about thinking about cool adventures, being out there talking to people. That's my best talent. And so just understanding all those other people, what their best talent is and what they enjoy doing.
Who are some guests that are dream guests that you haven't been able to have on the pod yet, but you would love to get on there?
I keep saying it, Tom Boonen, if he's listening, he's the dream. I'd love to have Tom on because Roubaix is my favorite race. He is Mr. Roubaix, in my opinion, Mr. Paris-Roubaix. So I would love to talk to him not only about Roubaix, about managing expectation as a Belgian superstar, because Belgium is, as you know, the heartland of cycling. One of the heartlands, let's say that. So walking down the street as a Tom Boonen, what is that like? How did he keep performing so well for so many years living in Belgium with that expectation? I think it'd be really interesting to discuss that. And then of the ins and outs of Roubaix, having such great success early days in Roubaix right through till the end. Love to talk to him about that. And look, he's really the top of the tree for me at the moment. I wouldn't mind having a chat to Lance about Lance Armstrong, that is, about his rivalry with Jan Ulrich. I was a big Jan Ulrich fan, so in those days, I was like, oh, come on, we got to beat Lance. I love the underdog card and love seeing how Jan would come back from these ridiculous weights and be ready for the Tour and the Bianchi era. And I'd love to feel what it was like from the other side and understand that. They're probably the two big ones that I would love to get. And then, honestly, I'm really enjoying just doing these adventures at the moment, and taking people on the road with me and feeling what it's like, and just talking to every Joe Blows, because everyone's got a great story to tell. And I think that's been the nice thing about life in the Peloton. We don't necessarily always have the big name guests. Every so often there is someone a big name, but that's been the moment I wanted to speak to them, because there's a good story I want to tell. It's not just because they're a name.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely get it. When I think about Boonen, I of course think about his yellow Lambo and all the fun that Tom had. And I have my DJ set up to the right of me, and I think about what I've read about him having. I think he has like 10,000 pieces of vinyl, and he likes to DJ. I don't know if he still does, but I think that'd be an incredible interview. And man, I would love to find out, how did he do all of that with exposed cables and what appear to be 46 centimeter bars, right?
It's just a different time. You know what I mean? And that's what I love about it. Like, I went back and redid this Paris-Roubaix film with GCN last year, and I rode Museu's Colnago C40. And those things still go across the cobbles all right. Everyone was on the same bike. So it's just what it was. I of course, we're going across it faster, and you think, how could they possibly do it in something less? You can still do it, and everyone was doing it. So it sort of made the playing field even.
That's incredible. Well, Mitch, I'm sure that Tom Boonen interview is probably right around the corner. I can feel it in the air. I think that it's going to happen. And I know you've got your kids waiting for you. You've got a holiday. It's morning where you are. It's evening where I am, and I have children probably waiting to see me, I hope, to go to bed. But thanks so much for making time to do this. Like I said, I've followed your career. I've followed the podcast the entire time it's existed, and just really grateful to you for taking time to do this today. So thank you.